They called it the Hobbit Shack, a crumbling earth-covered cottage where a struggling mother and her young daughter lived in shame at the edge of town. But when a storm ripped open the ground behind their home, that little girl found a tunnel holding a secret so massive, so valuable, it would silence every person who ever laughed at them and rewrite the history of an entire town. Before we explore this incredible story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The rain came down in sheets that October night, hammering the tin roof of the small cottage like 1,000 angry fists. Maya Rodriguez pressed her palm against the cold window glass, watching water carve rivers through the mud of her tiny yard. The house sat half buried into the hillside, its rounded door and grass-covered roof making it look like something pulled straight from a fantasy novel. Except there was nothing magical about their life here, just survival, day after grinding day. Maya was 32 years old, but her hands told the story of someone much older. Cracked skin, broken nails, calluses that never healed. She worked as a cleaning lady for the wealthy families up on Ridgemont Hill, scrubbing their marble floors while they pretended not to see her. 6 days a week, sometimes 7 when the bills piled too high. $12 an hour, cash under the table, no benefits, no sick days, no complaints allowed. Behind her, curled up on the sagging couch, wrapped in every blanket they owned, was 8-year-old Lily, her daughter, her entire world. Lily had her mother's dark eyes, but hadn't yet inherited the weariness that lived in them. She clutched a stuffed rabbit missing one ear, the only toy she'd brought when they'd moved here 3 years ago after the eviction. After Maya's ex-husband had emptied their bank account and disappeared into the night, leaving nothing but debt and a restraining order that didn't mean much when he was already 1,000 miles away. The cottage had cost them $450 a month, the cheapest thing Maya could find in Ashwood Ridge. The landlord, a man named Vernon Keats who owned half the rental properties in town, had laughed when she'd first come to see it. "It's ugly as sin," he'd said, tobacco juice staining his yellow teeth. "But it's got running water and electricity mostly. You want it or not?" She'd wanted it. She'd needed it. So she'd signed the lease with hands that shook and moved her daughter into a home that looked like it belonged to fairy tale creatures, not real people trying to survive in the modern world. That had been 3 years ago. 3 years of sideways glances. 3 years of whispered comments. 3 years of watching Lily come home from school with tears in her eyes and mud on her backpack because the other kids had pushed her down again, calling her the Hobbit girl, the dirt dweller, the freak from the funny house. "Mama," Lily's small voice cut through the sound of rain. "Is the roof going to fall in?" Maya turned from the window and forced a smile. "No, baby. This old place has survived worse storms than this." She hoped that was true. The cottage had been built sometime in the 1960s by a man people said was eccentric, possibly crazy. He'd dug into the hillside and constructed the house partially underground, insulated with earth and covered with sod on the roof. It was supposed to be energy efficient, earth-friendly, ahead of its time. But time hadn't been kind to it. The wood frame sagged, the door stuck in humid weather, and the whole structure seemed to exhale dampness no matter how many dehumidifiers Maya ran when she could afford the electricity to power them. But it was theirs. Sort of. For now. The rain intensified. Maya watched the water streaming down the hillside behind their house, cutting deeper channels through the mud with each passing minute. Something about the way the ground was moving made her uneasy. The yard had always been unstable, especially after heavy rains, but tonight felt different, more violent, more determined. "Come away from the window, Mama," Lily said quietly. "You're making me nervous." Maya crossed the small living room and sat beside her daughter, pulling the blankets over both of them. The propane heater in the corner clicked and hummed, doing its best to fight off the October chill. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley like the earth itself was groaning. "Tell me a story," Lily whispered. "A good one." Maya stroked her daughter's hair, soft and dark and in need of a trim Maya couldn't afford. "What kind of story?" "One where we don't live here anymore, where we have a big house with my own room and you don't have to work so hard and the kids at school like me." Maya's throat tightened. Baby, those kids, they just don't understand. People fear what's different, what they don't know. But being different doesn't mean being less than. Then why does it feel like it? Lily asked, her voice so small it nearly broke Maya's heart. Before Maya could answer, a sound like splitting wood cracked through the night. The cottage shuddered. The lights flickered once, twice, then held. Maya was on her feet instantly, heart pounding. That hadn't been thunder. That had been something structural, something wrong. She grabbed her flashlight from the kitchen counter and pulled on her work boots, the ones with the soles that had been glued back on twice already. Stay here, Lily. Don't move from that couch. Mama, no. I mean it. Stay put. Maya stepped out into the storm, immediately soaked to the bone. The rain was coming down so hard she could barely see 3 feet in front of her. She clicked on the flashlight and moved around the side of the cottage toward the back, where the hillside pressed against their home like a sleeping giant. What she saw made her stop cold. A massive section of the hillside had given way. Mud and debris had slid down, pulling away from the cottage's back wall and exposing something that shouldn't be there. In the beam of her flashlight, she could see it clearly. Stone. Fitted stones, old and weathered, forming what looked like a retaining wall or foundation that had been buried beneath the earth. And there, partially revealed by the mudslide, was an opening. Stone steps leading down into darkness. Maya moved closer, her boots squelching through the mud. The steps were real, solid, ancient-looking. Each one was roughly 18 inches wide and carved from some kind of granite or limestone. They descended at a steep angle into the hillside, disappearing into a black void her flashlight couldn't fully penetrate. Her first thought was that this was some kind of old root cellar or storm shelter from when the house was built. But something about the craftsmanship, the way the stones were fitted together without mortar, the sheer age of them, told her this was much older than the 1960s. She stood at the edge of the opening, rain streaming down her face, and felt a pull she couldn't explain. A whisper in the back of her mind saying this changes everything. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the hillside in stark white light. For just a moment, Maya thought she saw marks on the exposed stones, symbols or letters carved into the surface. But then darkness swallowed them again, and she wondered if her eyes had played tricks on her. "Mama!" Lily's voice, small and frightened, called from the doorway. "What's wrong?" Maya turned back toward the cottage. Her daughter stood silhouetted in the dim yellow light from inside, the stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. "Nothing, baby," Maya called back, though her heart was racing. "Just some mud came loose. Everything's okay. Get back inside before you catch cold." But everything wasn't okay. As Maya sloshed back through the rain toward the cottage door, she couldn't shake the feeling that the hillside had just revealed something that had been waiting a very long time to be found. The next morning dawned grey and cold. The rain had finally stopped around 4 in the morning, leaving everything soaked and dripping. Maya had barely slept, her mind churning with thoughts of those stone steps, those strange markings, the impossible age of the stonework. She got Lily ready for school, packing her the usual lunch of peanut butter sandwich, an apple that was more bruised than fruit, and a handful of crackers. Lily moved slowly, reluctantly, the way she did every school morning. Maya knew what awaited her daughter at Ashwood Ridge Elementary, the whispers, the pointing, the casual cruelty of children who'd learned from their parents that it was okay to look down on people who had less. "Do I have to go?" Lily asked for the 1,000th time as they walked to the bus stop. "You have to go," Maya answered for the 1,000th time, her heart breaking a little more with each repetition. "But Mama, education is the way out, Lily. The way to a better life than this. You have to go, you have to learn, and you have to be stronger than they are." Lily didn't respond, just kicked at a stone on the sidewalk. The bus stop was at the end of their street, where 4 other children waited with their parents. When Maya and Lily approached, the conversations stopped. The other parents, women in yoga pants and expensive sneakers, pulled their children a little closer, as if poverty might be contagious. "Morning," Maya said, forcing brightness into her voice. a few mumbled responses. One woman, Patricia Drummond, who lived in one of the new development houses up on Ridgemont Hill, actually turned her back completely. Maya had cleaned Patricia's house just last Thursday, had scrubbed her toilets and mopped her floors and folded her expensive laundry. Patricia had walked through the house talking on her phone the entire time, never once acknowledging Maya's presence, except to point at a spot she'd missed on the kitchen counter. The yellow school bus rumbled up, brakes squealing. The other children climbed on, laughing, chattering. Lily climbed on last, head down, shoulders hunched. Through the window, Maya watched her daughter take a seat alone at the back while the other kids clustered together in groups, deliberately excluding her. Maya stood at the bus stop long after it had pulled away, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "It's sad, really," she heard Patricia say to another mother as they walked away. "That child growing up in that awful Hobbit shack. I mean, there are resources, programs, but some people just won't help themselves, you know?" Maya wanted to scream, wanted to chase them down and explain that she worked 60 hours a week, that every dollar went to keeping Lily fed and clothed, that there was no money left for anything else, not even the deposit and first month's rent it would take to move into a better place. She wanted to tell them about her ex-husband, about the debt he'd left, about the garnished wages and the medical bills from when Lily had pneumonia 2 winters ago. But she didn't. She just stood there, silent and invisible, the way she'd learned to be. When she got back to the cottage, Maya changed into her work clothes, jeans and a plain t-shirt and grabbed her cleaning supplies. She had 3 houses to clean today. Tuesday through Saturday were her heavy days. But before she left, she walked around to the back of the cottage one more time. In the pale morning light, the exposed stone steps looked even more impossible. The mudslide had revealed about 12 feet of stonework, all of it fitted together with remarkable precision. And there, carved into the 3rd step down, she could see it clearly now, a symbol. It looked like a compass rose or maybe a star with 8 points. Beneath it, partially obscured by dried mud, were letters. She crouched down and brushed away the dirt with her fingers. The letters were strange, ornate, maybe Spanish or Latin. She couldn't read them, but she could see they'd been carved deep into the stone, meant to last, meant to be remembered. What happens next will pull Maya deeper into a mystery that powerful people have been hiding for over 100 years, reveal a truth that could change everything, and remind us why sometimes the most overlooked among us carry the greatest strength. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Maya stood up, brushing mud from her jeans. She was already late for her first cleaning job. She couldn't afford to lose this work, couldn't risk any of the families firing her. But she couldn't stop thinking about those steps, that darkness leading down into the hillside. She forced herself to walk away, to climb into her 15-year-old Honda Civic with the check engine light that never turned off, and drive up to Ridgemont Hill, where the houses stood like monuments to wealth, each one bigger and more ostentatious than the last. Her first job was the Morrison House, a sprawling colonial with 6 bedrooms and a 4-car garage. Mrs. Morrison was in her 50s, recently divorced, and liked to drink white wine while Maya cleaned. She'd leave the bottle out on the counter like a dare, never offering a glass, just letting it sit there while Maya scrubbed around it. "Oh, Maya," Mrs. Morrison said when she answered the door, still in her bathrobe at 10 in the morning. "You're late." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison. We had some storm damage last night. Part of the hillside collapsed." Mrs. Morrison sipped her wine. "How unfortunate. Well, the guest bathroom needs extra attention today. My daughter's visiting this weekend with her children, and you know how particular she is." Maya nodded and got to work. She scrubbed toilets, mopped floors, dusted furniture that cost more than she made in 6 months. She worked methodically, efficiently, her mind half focused on the tasks and half spinning with thoughts of those stone steps. By the time she finished her 3rd house of the day, the sun was setting. Her back ached, her hands were raw from chemicals, and she had exactly $43 in tips tucked into her pocket. Not bad for a Tuesday. Maybe enough to buy Lily new shoes before winter really set in. She drove home as darkness fell, the cottage appearing in her headlights like something from another time, another world. Lily was already there, let in by their neighbour, Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who watched Lily for an hour each day after school until Maya got home. It was an arrangement that cost Maya $50 a week she could barely afford, but it was better than leaving her daughter alone. "How was school?" Maya asked as she came through the door. Lily was at the small kitchen table, homework spread out in front of her. She didn't look up. "Fine." "Lily, it was fine, Mama. Same as always." Maya set down her cleaning supplies and moved to the table. She saw it immediately, the fresh bruise on Lily's elbow, the dirt smudge on her cheek that hadn't been there this morning, the way her daughter held herself tight and closed off. "Who was it today?" "Nobody. I fell." "Lily, don't lie to me." Her daughter's face crumpled. "It was Jackson Drummond and his friends. They said our house looks like a grave, and we're probably going to get buried alive in it like the dirt people we are. And when I told them to shut up, Jackson pushed me down and everyone laughed." Maya felt something crack open inside her chest. Jackson Drummond, Patricia Drummond's son, the boy whose bedroom Maya had cleaned just last week, picking up his expensive toys and making his bed while his mother complained on the phone about how hard it was to find good help these days. "I'm going to talk to his mother," Maya said. "No, Mama, please, it'll just make it worse." "I can't let them keep treating you like this." "What are you going to do?" Lily asked, and there was something in her voice that stopped Maya cold. It wasn't anger or fear, it was resignation, acceptance, the voice of a child who'd already learned that the world wasn't fair, and complaining about it changed nothing. "You can't make them like me. You can't make them see us different. We live in the Hobbit shack. We're poor. That's just how it is." Maya pulled Lily into her arms and held her tight. "That's not who you are. Where we live doesn't define us. How much money we have doesn't define us." "Then what does?" Lily whispered against her shoulder. Maya didn't have an answer. She just held her daughter and let the silence speak for her. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Maya stood in the backyard with a flashlight and a shovel. The temperature had dropped, and her breath came out in white puffs. She approached the exposed stone steps, her heart beating faster with each step. She'd made a decision. Maybe it was reckless, maybe it was stupid, but she needed to know what was down there, needed to understand why these stones existed, what they meant, what they were hiding. Because sometimes, when life has beaten you down so far you can't see a way forward, you have to look backward, down, anywhere but where you've been. Maya positioned herself at the top of the steps and shined her flashlight down into the darkness. The beam disappeared into nothing about 20 feet down, swallowed by the black. She tested the first step with her foot, expecting it to crumble or shift, but it held solid as bedrock. She descended slowly, one step at a time, the flashlight beam sweeping back and forth across stone walls that closed in around her. The air grew colder and smelled of earth and minerals and something else, something old and metallic. After 23 steps, she counted each one. The stairs leveled out into a narrow tunnel. The walls here were different, not fitted stone, but carved directly from the bedrock, smooth and precise, and covering every surface were marks, symbols, letters, and numbers carved into the stone. She recognized some of them as Roman numerals. Others looked like surveying marks, or maybe claims of some kind. One symbol appeared over and over, a pickaxe crossed with something that might have been a compass or a cross. Maya moved deeper into the tunnel, her flashlight the only light in a darkness that felt older than memory. The passage angled downward, following what seemed to be a natural fault line in the rock. Every 10 feet or so, she passed timber supports, old hand-hewn beams that had somehow survived decades, maybe a century or more, underground. 50 feet in, the tunnel opened into a small chamber, maybe 10 feet across, and there, carved into the back wall in letters a foot high, were words in English. Ashwood Consolidated Mining Company, 1879, registered claim number 42. Maya stared at the words, her mind racing. 1879. That was over 140 years ago. She knew Ashwood Ridge had been a mining town once, back during the Colorado Gold Rush, but all the histories she'd read said the mines had been in the mountains 10 miles west, not here in the valley. This was supposed to be farmland, settled land, safe land, but here was proof that someone had been mining right here, right beneath what would eventually become her backyard. She swept her flashlight across the chamber and noticed something else. In the corner, partially hidden behind a fallen timber, was a metal box. It was old, rusted, about the size of a toolbox. Maya approached it carefully, half expecting it to crumble at her touch. But when she lifted it, it was solid, heavy. She carried it back toward the tunnel entrance, her hands shaking. Whatever was inside this box, it had been left here for a reason. Hidden here, forgotten here. As she climbed back up the stone steps, the metal box clutched under one arm. Maya didn't notice the way the shadows seemed to shift behind her in the tunnel. Didn't see the fresh marks in the dust that suggested someone else had been down here recently. Didn't hear the soft sound of breathing from somewhere deeper in the darkness, where the tunnel continued on into places her flashlight hadn't yet reached. She emerged into her backyard, gulping the cold night air like she'd been drowning. The cottage lights glowed warm and yellow in the darkness, and through the window she could see Lily's small form asleep on the couch, the stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Maya looked down at the metal box in her hands. It was locked, but the lock was so rusted she thought she could probably break it with a hammer. Inside could be nothing. Old tools, worthless papers, the forgotten detritus of men long dead. Or inside could be something else. Something that would explain why a mining tunnel existed beneath her home, why it had been sealed and hidden and buried beneath a hillside for over a century, why no history book or town record ever mentioned it. She carried the box inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it for a long time before finally going to bed. Tomorrow, she'd open it. Tomorrow, she'd find out what secrets the earth had kept hidden all these years. But tonight, exhausted and aching, Maya Rodriguez simply crawled into bed next to her sleeping daughter, pulled the thin blankets over them both, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, everything might change. But tonight, they were still just the Hobbit girl and her mother, invisible and forgotten in their earth-covered cottage at the edge of town. The metal box sat on the kitchen table, silent and patient, waiting to reveal what powerful men had buried in the darkness a lifetime ago. Maya woke before dawn, her body clock trained by years of early morning cleaning shifts. Lily slept beside her, curled into a tight ball, her breathing soft and steady. For a moment, Maya just watched her daughter sleep, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her eyelashes rested against her skin. These quiet moments were all she had sometimes, the only peace in a life that felt like running uphill with weights strapped to her ankles. But this morning, her eyes kept drifting to the kitchen table where the metal box sat in shadow. She'd dreamed about it all night, strange fever dreams of tunnels that went on forever, of voices echoing through stone, of gold glittering in darkness like captured stars. She slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake Lily, and padded across the cold floor to the kitchen. The box was exactly as she'd left it, rust-covered and ancient, its lock corroded but still holding. Maya grabbed a hammer from under the sink and a flathead screwdriver from the junk drawer that stuck every time she opened it. She positioned the screwdriver against the old lock and struck it once with the hammer. The sound cracked through the silent cottage, sharp and final. The lock broke away, pieces of rusted metal scattering across the table. Maya set down the tools and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in what had once been oilcloth but was now brittle and yellowed, were papers. Maya carefully unfolded the first document, her hands trembling slightly. It was a map, hand-drawn in faded ink on thick parchment paper. At the top, written in elaborate script, it read, Ashwood Valley Mining Operations, 1879. The map showed the valley in intricate detail, but not as Maya knew it. Instead of houses and streets, it showed tunnel systems, shaft entrances, and claim boundaries. Her finger traced the lines, following a main tunnel that ran directly beneath where her cottage now stood. The tunnel branched off in multiple directions, like roots from a tree, spreading under what was now downtown Ashwood Ridge, under Ridgemont Hill, under the elementary school where Lily faced torment every day. Beneath the map were more documents. A claim registry listing 47 different mining operations, each with coordinates and owner names. A ledger showing ore samples and assay results, numbers that meant nothing to Maya but were recorded with meticulous care. And at the bottom of the box, a leather journal, its cover cracked and water-stained but still intact. Maya opened the journal to the first page. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, written with what must have been a fountain pen. It read, "Personal record of Thomas Ashwood, Mine Superintendent, Ashwood Consolidated Mining Company. January 1st, 1879. Thomas Ashwood. The man the town was named after." Maya had seen his statue in the town square, a bronze figure in a suit and top hat, looking stern and respectable. The plaque called him a visionary businessman and town founder, but here in her hands was his personal journal, found in a sealed box in a hidden tunnel. Maya flipped through the pages, her eyes catching fragments of entries. The mine is producing beyond our wildest expectations. The main vein continues deeper than any of us imagined. We are extracting nearly 200 ounces per ton in some sections. The men work around the clock, and the gold flows like water. 200 ounces per ton. Maya didn't know much about mining, but even she understood that was extraordinary. She kept reading, moving through months of entries, watching Thomas Ashwood's neat handwriting chronicle the growth of a mining empire nobody in modern-day Ashwood Ridge seemed to know had existed. Then, in an entry dated October 15th, 1879, the tone changed. "Today we received word from the territorial governor. There has been a consolidation order. All independent mining operations in Ashwood Valley are to cease immediately. The claims are being transferred to the Colorado Mining Consortium under the authority of the territorial legislature. We are to seal all tunnels, remove all equipment, and vacate the premises within 30 days. No compensation has been offered. When I protested, I was informed that resistance would be met with federal intervention. They are stealing everything we built, everything we found." Maya read the entry 3 times, her heart pounding. She flipped forward through the journal, watching Thomas Ashwood's handwriting become more erratic, more desperate. November the 2nd, 1879. "We have sealed the main entrance as ordered, but I have left the secondary access points hidden. What we found here is too valuable to simply abandon. The consortium believes they have claimed empty tunnels, but they have no idea the true extent of what lies beneath this valley." November 18th, 1879. "I have moved the most detailed maps and records to a secure location. If our claims are ever validated, if justice is ever served, the evidence will exist. I have built my home above the southern access point, hidden it beneath earth and timber. Let them try to find what they cannot see." December 1st, 1879. "This will be my final entry. Tomorrow we leave Ashwood Valley. The consortium has sent armed men to ensure our departure. But I leave knowing the gold remains, waiting in darkness, protected by stone and secret. Perhaps one day someone will uncover the truth of what was stolen here." The journal ended there. Maya sat at the kitchen table as grey dawn light began to filter through the windows, her mind reeling. Thomas Ashwood had built a house above a tunnel entrance. Her cottage sat on that exact spot, she was sure of it. The earth-covered design, the strange half-buried construction, it had never been about energy efficiency or eccentricity. It had been about concealment, about hiding an entrance to tunnels that held a fortune in gold that powerful men had stolen over 140 years ago. "Mama?" Lily's voice, small and sleepy, came from the bedroom doorway. "What are you doing up so early?" Maya quickly closed the journal. "Just couldn't sleep, baby. Come here, let me make you some breakfast." But as she moved through the motions of pouring cereal and packing Lily's lunch, her thoughts were underground, in the darkness, following tunnel lines on a hand-drawn map to places that shouldn't exist but did. After Lily left for school, Maya called in sick to her cleaning jobs. She'd never done that before, had worked through flu and strep throat and a sprained ankle because she couldn't afford to lose the income. But today was different. Today, she needed answers. She spent the morning at the Ashwood Ridge Public Library, a small brick building that smelled like old paper and floor polish. The librarian, a woman in her 60s named Margaret, looked up in surprise when Maya walked in. The library wasn't a place people like Maya usually visited, not when every moment not spent working was needed for survival. "Can I help you find something?" Margaret asked, her tone polite but guarded. "I'm looking for information about the town's mining history, 1870s and 80s. Margaret's expression shifted, became more interested. "Well, we don't get many people asking about that. Most of the historical focus is on the agricultural development and the railroad. Let me show you what we have." She led Maya to a back corner where a single shelf held local history books, most of them self-published by amateur historians or collected newspaper articles bound in fading covers. Margaret pulled down 3 volumes and set them on a nearby table. "These might help, though I'll warn you, there isn't much about mining. The town was primarily agricultural." Maya thanked her and sat down with the books. She opened the first one, a history compiled in 1963 by someone named Eleanor Whitmore. She scanned the table of contents and found a chapter titled Early Settlement and Industry. The chapter was brief, only 4 pages, and devoted most of its space to discussing wheat farming and cattle ranching. Mining was mentioned in a single paragraph. While some minor prospecting occurred in the Ashwood Valley region during the gold rush of the 1870s, no significant deposits were found. The town's growth was instead driven by its fertile soil and access to railroad transportation beginning in 1885. Maya stared at the words. No significant deposits were found. But Thomas Ashwood's journal had documented 200 ounces per ton. That wasn't minor prospecting. That was a major discovery. She opened the second book, a collection of newspaper articles from the Ashwood Ridge Gazette, dating back to 1876. She flipped through carefully, looking for anything about mining. Most articles discussed social events, marriages, business openings, and local politics. Then, on a page dated September 9th, 1879, she found something. The article headline read, "Territorial Legislature Passes Mining Consolidation Act." The brief text explained that all independent mining claims in 3 Colorado valleys, including Ashwood, were being transferred to a new consortium backed by Eastern investors and territorial officials. Property owners would be compensated fairly, the article claimed, though no specific amounts were mentioned. The article praised the consolidation as bringing order and professional management to what had been a chaotic rush of individual prospectors. Maya read between the lines. This was the theft Thomas Ashwood had written about, repackaged as legitimate government action and progress. She was about to close the book when she noticed something. At the bottom of the same page, partially obscured by the binding, was another small article. The headline read, "Mine Superintendent Departs Valley." The text was barely 3 sentences. Thomas Ashwood, Superintendent of Mining Operations in Ashwood Valley, has departed for California. Mr. Ashwood expressed satisfaction with his time in the territory and confidence in the new consolidated operations. He leaves behind no forwarding address. No forwarding address. Maya thought about the journal's final entry, written in desperate, angry handwriting. Thomas Ashwood hadn't left satisfied. He'd been forced out, and he'd made sure nobody would find him to ask questions. What happens next will reveal the full scope of what Maya has stumbled into, expose the powerful forces that want her silence, and show us that some secrets are buried not because they're forgotten, but because they're too valuable to reveal. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Maya checked out the books, Margaret raising an eyebrow but saying nothing, and drove home with her mind spinning. She had to go back into the tunnel, had to explore further, see what else was hidden down there. The journal and maps had given her pieces of the puzzle, but she needed to see it with her own eyes. That afternoon, after collecting Lily from school and making sure she was settled with homework and a snack, Maya grabbed 2 heavy-duty flashlights, a backpack with water and snacks, and her phone, though she doubted there'd be any signal underground. She told Lily she was going to clear some debris from the storm damage and would be back in an hour. The sun was already sinking toward the mountains when Maya descended the stone steps for the second time. She moved faster now, more confident, the flashlight beam cutting through darkness that felt less menacing and more like anticipation. She reached the small chamber with Thomas Ashwood's carved message and paused, studying the walls more carefully. There, partially hidden behind a support timber, she found what she was looking for. A passage, narrower than the main tunnel, angling sharply downward. It had been concealed deliberately, rocks stacked to look like a natural wall, but loose enough to move. Maya began shifting the rocks, working carefully, and within 10 minutes she'd cleared an opening large enough to squeeze through. The passage beyond was tight, her shoulders brushing both walls, and it descended at a steep angle that made her nervous. If she slipped, she'd slide down into darkness with nothing to stop her. But she kept going, drawn forward by curiosity and something deeper, a sense that her entire life had been leading to this moment, to this discovery. After what felt like 100 feet, but was probably closer to 50, the passage opened into another chamber. This one was larger, maybe 20 feet across, with a ceiling high enough that her flashlight beam barely reached it. And covering the walls, glittering in the light like captured fire, were veins of gold. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She'd never seen raw gold before, not like this. It ran through the quartz rock in thick ribbons, sometimes as wide as her hand, twisting and branching like frozen lightning. The veins crisscrossed the chamber in every direction, disappearing into the floor and ceiling, suggesting the deposit extended far beyond what she could see. She moved closer to one wall, reaching out to touch the gold. It was cold, smooth, unmistakably real. Her fingers traced a vein that had to be worth thousands of dollars, and this was just one small section of one chamber. If the entire tunnel system contained deposits like this, the value would be staggering. Maya pulled out her phone and started taking pictures, dozens of them from every angle. The camera flash made the gold shine even brighter, turning the dark chamber into something that looked like a treasure room from a fairy tale, which, she supposed, was exactly what it was. She was so focused on documenting the gold that she almost missed the sound, a soft scraping, like boot on stone, coming from somewhere behind her in the darkness. Maya spun around, her flashlight beam sweeping across the chamber entrance. "Hello?" she called out, her voice swallowed by the stone. "Is someone there?" No answer, but she was certain she'd heard something. She moved toward the entrance, flashlight held out like a weapon, her heart hammering against her ribs. The passage back was empty. Maya climbed up carefully, checking behind her every few feet, but saw nothing, heard nothing more. When she reached the main chamber with Thomas Ashwood's carved message, she stopped. Something was different. She swept her flashlight across the space, and then she saw it. On the wall, written in what looked like fresh chalk, were words that hadn't been there an hour ago. "Stop digging. Leave now. This is your only warning." Maya's blood turned to ice. Someone else knew about the tunnels. Someone had followed her down here, or had been waiting down here. Someone who wanted her gone. She ran. She scrambled up the stone steps, her flashlights bobbing wildly, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She burst out into her backyard just as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like fire. Inside the cottage, Lily looked up from her homework in surprise. "Mama, you're all dirty. What happened?" Maya looked down at herself. Her jeans were covered in rock dust and mud, her hands scraped and bleeding from where she'd scrambled up the passage. "I'm fine, baby. Just slipped in the mud. I'm going to take a quick shower, okay?" But her hands shook as she turned on the water, her mind replaying that message over and over. "Stop digging. Leave now. This is your only warning." Someone was watching her. Someone knew what she'd found. And someone was threatened enough by her discovery to leave a warning in the dark. Maya stood under the hot water, trying to calm her racing heart, trying to think clearly. She should call the police, report the trespassing, the threat. But what would she tell them? That someone had left a message in an illegal mining tunnel beneath her property. That she'd found evidence of gold deposits that shouldn't exist according to every town history. They'd think she was crazy. Or worse, they'd investigate, and the wrong people would learn what was hidden down there. The wrong people might already know, might be the ones leaving warnings. That night, after Lily went to bed, Maya sat at the kitchen table with Thomas Ashwood's journal and the hand-drawn maps spread out before her. She studied every detail, looking for answers, for guidance, for some indication of what to do next. One name kept appearing in the journal entries, mentioned in passing, but always with an edge of bitterness. Carlton Pierce. He'd been the territorial representative who'd pushed through the Consolidation Act. Thomas Ashwood had written about him with barely concealed contempt, calling him a puppet of Eastern mining interests and a man who would sell his own mother for the right price. Maya opened her laptop, her cheap machine taking forever to boot up, and searched for Carlton Pierce. What she found made her stomach sink. Carlton Pierce had gone on to become a wealthy and influential figure in Colorado politics. He'd served in the state legislature, owned multiple businesses, and founded several prominent families. And his great-great-grandson, Richard Pierce, currently served as Ashwood Ridge's mayor and owned the largest real estate development company in the valley. The pieces were clicking together. The mining consolidation hadn't been legitimate government action. It had been theft, orchestrated by men like Carlton Pierce, who'd used their political power to steal fortunes from independent miners. They'd covered it up, rewritten the history books, built their empires on stolen gold. And their descendants still held power in this town, still benefited from that original theft. If Maya exposed what was hidden beneath her property, she'd be threatening the foundation of wealth and influence that families like the Pierces had built over 5 generations. No wonder someone was warning her to stop digging. But Maya Rodriguez hadn't survived 3 years in the Hobbit shack, hadn't endured the mockery and the struggle and the endless grind of poverty by backing down when things got scary. She'd learned to fight for every scrap, every dollar, every moment of dignity in a world that wanted to grind her into dust. She wasn't going to stop now. The next morning, Maya dropped Lily at school and drove to the other side of town, to a neighborhood of modest but well-kept houses where the lawns were trimmed and American flags hung from porches. She was looking for an address she'd found in one of the library books, the home of Harold Brennan, age 93, the oldest living resident of Ashwood Ridge, and a man who'd spent his life studying local history. The house was a small ranch with yellow siding and flower boxes beneath the windows. Maya knocked, half expecting no answer, but within moments the door opened to reveal a man so thin he looked like he might blow away in a strong wind. But his eyes were sharp, alert, and when they landed on Maya, they narrowed with interest. "Mr. Brennan, my name is Maya Rodriguez. I'm sorry to bother you, but I was told you might be able to help me with some questions about Ashwood Ridge's mining history." Mining history? His voice was raspy but strong. "Nobody's asked me about that in 30 years. Come in, come in." The inside of the house was cluttered but clean, every surface covered with books, papers, and old photographs. Harold led her to a sitting room where walls were lined with filing cabinets and bookshelves. "You'll have to forgive the mess," he said, settling into a worn recliner. "When you spend 70 years researching something nobody else cares about, things tend to pile up. Now, what specifically do you want to know?" Maya pulled out her phone and showed him the pictures she'd taken in the tunnel. "I found these. There's a tunnel system beneath my property and evidence of gold deposits, but every history book says there was no significant mining in this valley." Harold stared at the photos for a long time, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he held the phone. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew the stories were true." "What stories?" Harold stood slowly and moved to one of the filing cabinets. He pulled out a folder stuffed with yellowed newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and photocopied documents. He handed it to Maya. "In 1953, I was 21 years old and working as a surveyor for the county. We were doing ground surveys for new water lines, and we kept finding anomalies. empty spaces underground where there should have been solid earth. When I asked the old-timers about it, a few of them, the ones old enough to remember the stories their grandparents told, they said there used to be mines all through this valley. Rich mines. But something happened and the mines were sealed and the history was erased. Maya opened the folder. Inside were dozens of documents, survey reports showing underground voids, old property deeds that mentioned mineral rights, fragments of personal letters discussing mining operations. I spent decades trying to prove it, Harold continued. But every official record had been scrubbed clean. The territorial archives, the state mining office, even the National Geological Survey, they all said the same thing. No significant mining ever occurred in Ashwood Valley. I was dismissed as a crank, a conspiracy theorist. My own family thought I was obsessed with fantasy. He looked at Maya's phone again, at the pictures of gold gleaming in darkness. But I knew. And now you've found the proof. What happened? Maya asked. How did they cover it up so completely? Harold returned to his chair, his expression distant, remembering. Money and power. The Consolidation Act of 1879 transferred all the mining claims to a consortium controlled by territorial officials and Eastern investors. They extracted the gold, millions of dollars worth, and used it to build empires. Then they sealed the tunnels, rewrote the records, and made sure nobody would ever question their legitimacy. The Pierce family, the Keats family, the Drummonds, all the wealthy families in this town, their fortunes were built on stolen gold. Maya thought about Vernon Keats, her landlord, about Patricia Drummond, whose house she cleaned, about Mayor Richard Pierce, whose name was on every new development in town. Why would they leave gold in the tunnels? She asked. Why not extract everything? Time, Harold said simply. The consolidation happened fast, too fast. They grabbed what they could reach easily, but the deeper deposits, the ones in secondary tunnels and sealed chambers, those would have taken years to extract properly. And by 1880, attention had shifted. New gold strikes in other parts of Colorado, the Transcontinental Railroad changing everything. They sealed what they couldn't immediately reach and bet that nobody would ever find it. Until now, Maya said quietly. Harold nodded. Until now. But you need to understand something, young lady. The families that built their wealth on that theft, they're not going to let you expose it. They'll fight you with lawyers, with money, with every tool at their disposal. Someone already left me a warning, Maya admitted, in the tunnel. Harold's face darkened. Then they know you found it, which means you're in danger. Real danger. Maya thought about Lily, about the bruises and the mockery, about living in a cottage people called the Hobbit shack, while families whose wealth was built on theft looked down on them from hilltop mansions. She thought about 3 years of scrubbing toilets and begging for shifts and counting every dollar while her daughter learned to be ashamed of where they lived. I'm not backing down, she said. Harold studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Good, because I've been waiting 50 years for someone brave enough to expose the truth. He reached into another drawer and pulled out a business card, yellowed with age. This is the contact information for a friend of mine, a lawyer in Denver who specializes in property rights and mineral claims. He'll probably be retired or dead by now, but his firm is still around. You're going to need legal help. Maya took the card. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Don't thank me yet, he said. What you're about to do, it's going to turn this town upside down. Are you ready for that? Maya thought about the gold glittering in the darkness, about Thomas Ashwood's journal, about a theft that had echoed down through generations. She thought about her daughter coming home with bruises and tears because of a system that had been rigged from the very beginning. I'm ready, she said. Harold smiled, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he looked young. Then let's bring the truth into the light. Maya left Harold Brennan's house with a backpack full of documents, a phone full of contacts, and a determination that burned hotter than anything she'd ever felt. The town of Ashwood Ridge had no idea what was coming, but they were about to learn that the Hobbit girl's mother was nobody's victim. She was about to become their reckoning. The lawyer's office in Denver was on the 20th floor of a glass tower that made Maya feel small and out of place. She'd driven 2 hours to get here, missing a full day of cleaning work she couldn't afford to lose. But Harold Brennan had insisted this was the only way forward. The firm was called Westbrook & Associates, and according to Harold, they'd handled some of the biggest mineral rights cases in Colorado history. Maya sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her car while a man named David Westbrook, grandson of Harold's original contact, reviewed the documents she'd brought. He was in his 50s, grey at the temples, wearing a suit that looked like it had been tailored specifically for him. He'd been silent for 20 minutes, flipping through Thomas Ashwood's journal, studying the photographs of the gold deposits, examining the maps with a jeweler's loupe. Finally, he set everything down and looked at Maya with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Miss Rodriguez, do you understand what you have here?" "I think so. Evidence of mining operations that were stolen through a corrupt Consolidation Act in 1879. "It's more than that." David leaned back in his chair. "What you have is proof that several of Colorado's most prominent families built their wealth on fraud. The Pierce family alone is worth an estimated $300 million. Their political influence extends to the state legislature and the governor's office. If you pursue this, they will come at you with everything they have." Maya's hands tightened on the armrests. "What about the gold that's still down there? Who does that belong to?" "That's complicated. Mineral rights law is tricky, especially when dealing with claims from the territorial period. But based on these documents, Thomas Ashwood and the other independent miners never legally transferred their claims. The Consolidation Act appears to have been pushed through without proper compensation or due process, which means the original claims could still be valid. Even after all this time, mineral rights don't expire the way other property rights do. If we can prove the transfer was fraudulent, then yes, the gold belongs to the heirs of the original claim holders. The problem is identifying those heirs after 145 years. Maya felt something sink in her chest. "So even if I prove all this, I don't get anything?" David studied her for a moment. "You own the property where the main tunnel entrance is located, correct?" "I rent it. $450 a month from Vernon Keats." "Who is a direct descendant of William Keats, one of the consortium members who orchestrated the consolidation." David made a note on his pad. "Let me ask you something, Miss Rodriguez. Why are you doing this? If it's about the money, there are easier ways to—" "It's not about the money." Maya's voice came out harder than she intended. "It's about the truth. My daughter goes to school every day where kids call her the Hobbit girl because we're poor, and we live in a house that looks different. Those kids' parents, they clean houses for people like the Pierces and the Keatses, people who live in mansions built on stolen gold, and they look down on us like we're nothing, like we deserve to struggle while they sit in their big houses and judge us." She stood up, unable to sit still any longer. "I want everyone to know. I want them to see that their precious founding families were thieves, that their wealth isn't legitimate, that people like me, we're not less than them just because we have less money." David watched her pace, then nodded slowly. "Then you should know something else. Based on the geological data in these maps and the photographs of the deposits you found, I contacted a mining engineer friend of mine. He did some preliminary calculations." He pulled out a folder and handed it to Maya. Inside was a typed report with numbers and technical terms she didn't fully understand. But at the bottom, highlighted in yellow, was an estimate. Total estimated value of remaining gold deposits in Ashwood Valley Tunnel System, $275 million. Maya stared at the number until it blurred. $275 million, hidden beneath a town that called her daughter names and made Maya invisible. "So what do I do?" she asked quietly. "First, we file a claim with the State Mining Office and the Bureau of Land Management. We'll need to document the tunnel system thoroughly, which means you'll need to go back down there with proper surveying equipment. I can arrange that. Second, we prepare for a legal battle unlike anything this town has ever seen. And third, you need to be ready for what comes next. Because the moment we file that claim, your life is going to change in ways you can't imagine." Maya thought about Lily, about the cottage, about the 3 years of barely surviving. She thought about the warning written in chalk on the tunnel wall. I'm ready, she said. The claim was filed on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, Maya's phone wouldn't stop ringing. She ignored the calls from numbers she didn't recognize, but when Vernon Keats called, she answered. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice was venomous, nothing like the casual contempt he usually showed her. "You filed a mining claim on my property." "The tunnel entrance is on the property I rent, which makes it nothing. You have a lease, not ownership. I'm terminating that lease effective immediately. You have 30 days to vacate." "You can't do that. I have 6 months left on—" "Read your lease, Miss Rodriguez. Section 7, paragraph C. I can terminate for cause, and filing spurious legal claims using my property definitely qualifies as cause. 30 days, and don't expect your deposit back." He hung up. Maya stared at her phone, her heart racing. She pulled out the lease from the folder where she kept important documents and found the section Vernon had mentioned. The language was vague enough that he might actually be able to enforce it. She was about to call David Westbrook when someone knocked on her door. Hard, authoritative knocking that made her stomach clench. Through the window, she saw a police cruiser in her driveway. Maya opened the door to find Sheriff Tom Brennan, no relation to Harold, standing on her porch. He was a big man, 50 pounds overweight and fond of mirrored sunglasses even on cloudy days. "Miss Rodriguez, I need to talk to you about some trespassing complaints." "Trespassing? On my own property?" "We've had reports of you entering restricted areas, specifically abandoned mine shafts that are considered hazardous. That's a violation of County Ordinance 42-9. Maya felt her face flush. "Those aren't abandoned. They're historic mining tunnels on property I legally occupy." "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay out of those tunnels until we can get a safety inspector out here, for your own protection." "And when will that be?" Sheriff Brennan shrugged. "Could be a while. The county inspector's pretty backed up. Might be 2-3 months before he can get out here." 2 or 3 months. Plenty of time for Vernon Keats to evict her, for the property to change hands, for the entrance to be sealed or destroyed. Maya understood what was happening. The pressure was already starting. "Am I being charged with anything?" "Not yet. Consider this a friendly warning. Stay out of the tunnels, Miss Rodriguez." He left, and Maya immediately called David Westbrook. He listened to her explanation, then sighed heavily. "They're not wasting any time. I'll file an emergency motion to prevent any interference with the tunnel system pending the claim hearing. But Maya, you need to understand, this is just the beginning." That night, after Lily was asleep, Maya sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. She started typing, her fingers moving almost of their own accord. She wrote about everything, about finding the tunnels, about Thomas Ashwood's journal, about the gold deposits worth hundreds of millions of dollars, about the families who'd built their empires on theft. When she finished, she had a 10-page document detailing everything she'd discovered. She saved it, backed it up to 3 different cloud services, and then did something that terrified her. She created a Facebook account, her first ever, and she posted the document publicly. Within an hour, it had been shared 17 times. By morning, over 2,000 people had read it. And by the time Maya woke up on Wednesday, her story was spreading through Ashwood Ridge like wildfire. She discovered this when she went to drop Lily at the bus stop and found Patricia Drummond waiting there with her phone out, reading Maya's post aloud to the other mothers. "Can you believe this? She's claiming the Pierce family fortune is based on stolen gold. As if Mayor Pierce would—" Patricia looked up and saw Maya. Her mouth snapped shut. The other mothers turned, their expressions ranging from shock to hostility to something that might have been curiosity. Maya held her head high and walked Lily to the bus, ignoring the whispers that started the moment her back was turned. "Mama," Lily whispered, clutching her backpack straps. "Why is everyone staring?" "Because sometimes standing up for the truth makes people uncomfortable, baby." The bus arrived, and Lily climbed aboard. Through the window, Maya saw Jackson Drummond pointing at Lily and laughing about something. Her daughter's shoulders hunched, making herself smaller, trying to be invisible. Maya wanted to scream. Instead, She turned and walked back past the mothers, meeting their eyes one by one, daring them to say something to her face. None of them did. But when she got home, there was a message on her door. More spray paint this time. Ugly red letters that said, "Liar." Maya took a picture of it before scrubbing it off, her hands shaking with anger. She sent the photo to David Westbrook and Sheriff Brennan, documenting everything. The sheriff never responded. David called within 10 minutes. "File a police report. I know they probably won't do anything, but we need documentation of harassment. And Maya, maybe consider staying somewhere else for a few nights, with friends or family." "I don't have anywhere else to go, and I'm not leaving." The next few days were a blur of hostility and small cruelties. Maya arrived at her cleaning job at the Morrison house to find the door locked and a note saying her services were no longer needed. 2 other clients called to cancel, both of them mumbling excuses about budget cuts and scheduling conflicts. By Friday, she'd lost half her income. But something else was happening too, something unexpected. It started with an email from someone named Jennifer Hastings. "I read your story," the email said. "My great-great-grandfather was a miner in Ashwood Valley. His name was Robert Hastings, and family stories say he lost everything when the government seized his claim. I always thought it was just a legend, but you've proven it was real. Thank you." Then another email, and another. A man whose ancestor had been Samuel Ortega, one of the 47 claim holders mentioned in the journal. A woman whose great-grandmother had worked in the mining office and told stories about documents being destroyed. Within a week, Maya had heard from 32 people, all of them descendants of the original miners, all of them sharing stories that had been passed down through generations but dismissed as fantasy or exaggeration. And slowly, voices in the community began to shift. It started with unexpected places. Lily's teacher, Miss Chen, sent Maya an email asking to meet. They sat in the empty classroom after school while Lily colored at a desk in the corner. "I wanted you to know," Miss Chen said quietly, "that I believe you. My grandfather worked in the mines in the 1940s and 50s, different mines in the mountains, but he used to talk about how the whole valley was riddled with old tunnels that the county pretended didn't exist. He said powerful people had reasons for keeping secrets." "Thank you," Maya said, surprised by how much the validation meant. "I also wanted you to know that Jackson Drummond won't be bothering Lily anymore. I've had a very serious conversation with his parents about his behavior, and if he continues, he'll face consequences." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. "I appreciate that more than you know." Miss Chen nodded. "Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, especially for people who've benefited from lies, but that doesn't make it less important." Other small gestures followed. The clerk at the grocery store, a young man named Marcus, quietly told Maya he'd given her a discount at the register because what she was doing took courage. Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who watched Lily, refused payment for the next 2 weeks. A woman Maya had never met left a bag of groceries on her porch with an anonymous note, "Keep fighting." But for every small kindness, there was a larger threat. Vernon Keats followed through on the eviction notice. David Westbrook fought it, but the judge, a man who'd gone to law school with Richard Pierce's brother, ruled that Vernon had the right to terminate the lease. Maya had until November 30th, 6 weeks away, to vacate the property. The day after the eviction ruling, Maya received a certified letter from Pierce Development Corporation. It was a purchase offer for her lease rights and any claims related to the property. The amount offered was $25,000. Maya laughed when she read it. $25,000 for mineral rights potentially worth $275 million. They must think she was desperate enough or stupid enough to accept. She wasn't. Instead, she drove back to Denver to meet with David Westbrook. His office was filled with new documents, depositions, and legal briefs. He looked exhausted. "The Pierce family has hired 3 different law firms," he told her. "They're challenging the validity of your claim, the authenticity of the documents, even your right to have entered the tunnels in the first place. They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks." "Can they win?" "Honestly, I don't know. But there's something else you need to see." He pulled up a document on his computer and turned the screen toward Maya. It was a geological survey report, professionally done, with satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar data. I hired a team to do a comprehensive survey of the area beneath your property and the surrounding valley. This cost me $80,000, which I'm covering as an investment because if we win this case, the percentage we agreed to will more than cover it. Maya barely heard him. She was staring at the images on the screen. The tunnel system was massive, far larger than Thomas Ashwood's maps had suggested. It spread beneath the entire town of Ashwood Ridge, branching and connecting in a network that looked like veins in a body. And throughout the system, marked in bright red, were gold deposits. The original estimate was conservative, David said quietly. Based on this survey and current gold prices, we're looking at deposits worth potentially $275 million, maybe more. Maya sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. That's enough to change everything. It's enough to destroy everything, David corrected, for the families whose wealth and influence are built on the theft of that gold, which is why they're going to fight like hell to stop this. What do? We go public, really public. I have contacts at the Denver Post, at Colorado Public Radio. We give them the full story, all the documentation, everything. We make this so visible they can't bury it. Maya thought about Lily, about the mockery and the bullying that would get worse when this became a statewide story. She thought about the spray-painted door, the lost jobs, the eviction notice. She thought about everything she'd have to endure to see this through. Do it, she said. The Denver Post article ran on a Sunday, the front page above the fold. The headline read, "Small-town mother uncovers evidence of 19th century gold theft worth hundreds of millions." The reporter, a woman named Sarah Kim, had done her homework. The article detailed everything: the tunnel system, Thomas Ashwood's journal, the Fraudulent Consolidation Act, the families who'd built fortunes on stolen gold. It named names: Pierce, Keats, Drummond, and 6 other prominent Ashwood Ridge families. It included quotes from descendants of the original miners, from Harold Brennan, from mining engineers who'd reviewed the evidence, and it included a photograph of Maya standing in front of the Hobbit shack, her chin raised, her eyes defiant. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By Monday morning, news vans from 3 Denver television stations were parked on her street. Reporters knocked on her door every hour. Her Facebook post had been shared over 50,000 times, and the town of Ashwood Ridge was in chaos. Mayor Richard Pierce held a press conference denying everything. He called the claims baseless and defamatory, threatened to sue Maya and the Denver Post for libel, and insisted his family's wealth came from legitimate business ventures. But his voice shook when he spoke, and the reporters asked questions he couldn't answer. How did his family acquire the capital to start their first business in 1880? Why were there no records of the mining consolidation at the territorial archives? What about the surveying data showing millions of dollars in gold beneath the town? He had no good answers. The story spread beyond Colorado. National news outlets picked it up. CNN ran a segment on small-town corruption. The New York Times published an editorial about America's history of resource theft and how the sins of the past echo in the present. And with the attention came something Maya hadn't expected: power. People started showing up at the Hobbit shack, descendants of miners from across Colorado bringing old letters and documents that had been tucked away in attics for generations. Legal advocates offering to help. Historians eager to document the truth. A documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell the full story. Maya's living room became a command center. People crowded around the kitchen table, sharing information, planning strategy. Harold Brennan showed up with 50 years of research, tears streaming down his weathered face as he finally saw validation for everything he'd tried to prove. "I knew," he kept saying. "I always knew." But the opposition was organizing too. The Pierce family and their allies hired a public relations firm. They started their own media campaign, painting Maya as an opportunist trying to extort money from respectable families. They dug into her past, publicized her eviction history, her ex-husband's criminal record, suggesting she couldn't be trusted. Vernon Keats went on local television claiming Maya had damaged his property and violated her lease. Patricia Drummond wrote an op-ed in the local paper about how this woman's false accusations were tearing apart a peaceful community. The attacks were personal and cruel, but they had one unintended effect. They made people angry on Maya's behalf. A rally was organized, nobody was quite sure by whom, in the Ashwood Ridge town square for a Saturday morning. Maya didn't want to go, terrified of standing in front of a crowd, but David Westbrook insisted. "You're the face of this fight," he said. "People need to see you, to hear from you directly." So on a cold November morning, Maya stood on a makeshift stage in front of the statue of Thomas Ashwood, the man whose journal had started everything, and looked out at a crowd of over 300 people. Some held signs supporting her, others held signs calling her a liar. News cameras captured everything. Maya had prepared notes, but when she pulled them from her pocket, her hands were shaking too badly to read them. She looked out at the faces, saw Lily standing with Miss Chen in the front row, and found her courage. "My name is Maya Rodriguez," she said, her voice barely audible. Someone adjusted the microphone. "My name is Maya Rodriguez, and 3 months ago I was invisible." The crowd quieted. "I cleaned your houses, scrubbed your toilets, mopped your floors. Most of you never looked at me, never said thank you, never asked my name. My daughter went to school with your children, and they called her the Hobbit girl, pushed her down, made her feel like she was worth less than nothing because we lived in a house that looked different and we didn't have money for nice clothes." She could see Patricia Drummond in the crowd, arms crossed, face red. "I'm not here today because I want to be rich. I'm here because I found proof that this town was built on theft, that the families who look down on people like me, who treat us as invisible, their wealth isn't legitimate. They inherited fortunes stolen from miners who did the actual work, who took the actual risks, who got nothing while men like Carlton Pierce used political power to take everything." Her voice was getting stronger now, fed by years of suppressed anger and frustration. "And when I dared to speak that truth, they tried to silence me, evicted me from my home, got me fired from my jobs, painted lies on my door, threatened me, all because the truth is dangerous to people whose power depends on lies." She looked directly at Mayor Richard Pierce, standing at the edge of the crowd with his arms crossed. "You want me to disappear, to shut up and accept my place. But I won't, because my daughter deserves to grow up in a world where truth matters more than money, where courage is valued more than comfort, where a woman cleaning houses has just as much right to dignity as a man living in a mansion." The crowd erupted, some cheering, some booing, all of them loud. Maya stepped back from the microphone, her whole body shaking. Miss Chen brought Lily up to the stage, and Maya pulled her daughter into her arms, holding tight while camera flashes popped around them. She didn't know if she'd said the right things, if she'd helped or hurt her cause, but she'd spoken her truth, and that had to count for something. What Maya didn't know was that in the back of the crowd, 2 men in dark suits had been filming the whole thing. They worked for the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, and they'd been following the Ashwood Ridge story very carefully. The call came 3 days later. David Westbrook answered, listened for 5 minutes, then looked at Maya with an expression she'd never seen before. "The FBI wants to meet with us," he said. "They're opening an investigation." The FBI field office in Denver was nothing like Maya had imagined. She'd expected something from the movies, stark rooms and two-way mirrors and intimidation tactics. Instead, she and David Westbrook were led to a comfortable conference room with coffee and pastries laid out on a table, like they were guests, not witnesses. 2 agents sat across from them. Special Agent Caroline Reeves was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and professional, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her partner, Special Agent Marcus Chen, was younger, maybe 35, with the kind of intense focus that made Maya feel like he was cataloguing every detail about her. "Miss Rodriguez," Agent Reeves began, "thank you for meeting with us. We've been reviewing the information you've made public, and we have some questions." "Am I in trouble?" Maya asked, her voice smaller than she intended. Agent Reeves smiled slightly. "No, but several people mentioned in your documents might be. We've opened an investigation into potential violations of federal mineral rights law, fraud, and possibly conspiracy to deprive citizens of their property rights. What you've uncovered could be one of the largest cases of historical land fraud in Colorado history. Over the next 3 hours, Maya and David walked the agents through everything. Thomas Ashwood's journal, the tunnel system, the geological surveys, the families who'd built empires on stolen gold. Agent Chen took meticulous notes while Agent Reeves asked questions that made it clear she understood not just the facts, but the implications. "The problem," Agent Reeves said when they'd finished, "is that most of the people who committed the original crimes are long dead. We can't prosecute ghosts. But what we can do is establish that the mineral rights were fraudulently transferred, which would invalidate any claims the current families have to that gold." "What happens then?" Maya asked. "That depends on a lot of factors. The courts would need to determine rightful ownership. It could take years to sort out. But Miss Rodriguez, I want you to understand something. What you've done here, bringing this to light, it's important. Not just for the potential money involved, but because it exposes a system that allowed powerful people to steal from vulnerable ones and face no consequences." Maya felt something loosen in her chest, something she hadn't realized she'd been holding tight. Validation. From people whose job was to uncover truth and deliver justice. "There is one concern," Agent Chen said, looking up from his notes. "We've been monitoring some communications between members of the Pierce family and their legal team. There are indications they're planning to seal the tunnel entrance on your property before we can complete our investigation. They're claiming it's a safety issue, but we believe it's an attempt to destroy evidence." "Can they do that?" David asked sharply. "Not legally, not once we've opened an investigation. I'm issuing a federal preservation order today. That property and the tunnels beneath it are now under FBI protection. Anyone who attempts to interfere will face federal charges." Maya thought about Vernon Keats showing up with a bulldozer, about Sheriff Brennan turning a blind eye while evidence was destroyed. But the FBI was different. The FBI had real power. "How long will the investigation take?" she asked. "Months at minimum. Possibly longer. But Miss Rodriguez, I want you to prepare yourself. This is going to get harder before it gets easier. These families aren't going to give up their wealth without a fight, and they have resources most people can only dream of." Maya nodded. She was already living that reality every single day. The eviction date was November 30th, just 2 weeks away. David had filed multiple motions to delay it, but Judge Morrison, Vernon Keats's brother-in-law, had denied them all. Maya started packing, methodically boxing up the life she'd built in the Hobbit shack, each item wrapped in newspaper, a reminder of how little they actually owned. Lily watched from the couch, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight, her eyes red from crying. She'd been coming home from school with more stories lately. Not about bullying this time, but about division. Some kids had started defending her, saying her mum was brave, that the rich families deserved to be exposed. Others doubled down on the mockery, their parents' anger filtering down through them. The school had become a battlefield, and Lily was caught in the middle. "Where are we going to live, Mama?" she asked for the 100th time. "I don't know yet, baby, but we'll figure it out." The truth was, Maya had nowhere to go. Every rental in Ashwood Ridge had mysteriously become unavailable when she applied. Landlords who'd been advertising vacancies suddenly claimed they'd already been filled. She'd called apartments in neighboring towns, but word had spread. The troublemaker from Ashwood Ridge wasn't welcome anywhere. She was sitting at the kitchen table that night, staring at eviction notices and a bank account balance of $317, when someone knocked on her door. Maya opened it to find Miss Chen, Lily's teacher, standing on the porch with another woman Maya didn't recognize. "Miss Rodriguez, I hope we're not intruding. This is my sister, Grace Chen. She owns a rental property in Clayton Ridge, about 20 minutes from here." The sister stepped forward holding a folder. "I've been following your story. What you're doing, standing up to those families, it takes real courage. I have a 3-bedroom house available. Rent is $700 a month. but I'm willing to work with you on the deposit until you get back on your feet." Maya stared at her, unable to speak. $700 was more than she'd been paying, but it was a real house in a town where nobody knew her story yet, where Lily could go to school without being the Hobbit girl. "I can't afford $700, Maya said quietly. "I've lost most of my cleaning jobs." Grace nodded. "I know. How about $600 for the first 6 months? That'll give you time to find new work, and no deposit, just first month's rent." Maya felt tears start to fall. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because my grandfather was one of the miners who lost everything in that consolidation. His name was William Chen. He died broke and broken, never recovering from what they did to him. You're fighting for people like him. The least I can do is give you a roof over your head while you do it." They moved into the Clayton Ridge house on November 28th, 2 days before the eviction deadline. The house was small but solid, with real insulation and a furnace that worked and windows that didn't leak when it rained. Lily had her own bedroom for the first time in 3 years. She cried when she saw it, happy tears that made Maya's heart ache. But leaving the Hobbit shack felt wrong, like abandoning a post in the middle of a battle. The tunnel entrance was still there, now marked with FBI evidence tape and under 24-hour surveillance by federal agents. The geological survey equipment was set up in the backyard, conducting the detailed analysis that would determine exactly how much gold existed beneath the valley. Maya drove back to the property every day, checking on the investigation's progress, documenting everything with her phone. The story had taken on a life of its own now. News crews from across the country had descended on Ashwood Ridge. The mayor was under investigation. Vernon Keats was facing questions about his role in the attempted eviction. Patricia Drummond had deleted all her social media accounts after being confronted about her family's history. And slowly, like ice cracking in spring, the town began to change. It started with small rebellions. The owner of Rosie's Diner, a woman in her 60s named Rosie Martinez, put up a sign in her window. "We support Maya Rodriguez. Truth matters more than comfort." Half her regular customers stopped coming, but new people showed up, descendants of miners, supporters of justice, tourists drawn by the national story. Within 2 weeks, Rosie's was busier than it had been in years. Other businesses followed. The hardware store started selling Hobbit Strong t-shirts, with all proceeds going to legal fees for descendants of the original miners. The public library created a display about Ashwood Ridge's true mining history, featuring copies of documents from Harold Brennan's 50 years of research. The high school history teacher revised her curriculum to include the Consolidation Act and its aftermath, teaching students that their town's founding myth was built on lies. Not everyone was happy about it. The wealthy families and their supporters fought back with everything they had. They organized counter-protests, hired more lawyers, and used their influence to pressure businesses that supported Maya. The Pierce family pulled their donations from the local hospital, demanding the board issue a statement condemning baseless accusations. The hospital refused, and Richard Pierce's response was to threaten a lawsuit. But something had shifted in Ashwood Ridge. The people who'd been invisible, who'd cleaned houses and served food and fixed cars while the wealthy looked through them, were finding their voices. And those voices were getting louder. A town hall meeting was called for the second week of December. The high school auditorium was packed, standing room only, with news cameras lining the back wall. Mayor Richard Pierce stood at the podium looking smaller than Maya had ever seen him, his expensive suit unable to hide the defeat in his shoulders. "I want to address the recent allegations," he began, his voice barely steady. "My family has been part of this community for 5 generations. We've employed hundreds of people, donated millions to local causes, built the infrastructure that makes modern Ashwood Ridge possible." "With stolen gold," someone shouted from the audience. Pierce's face reddened. "These accusations are based on documents that haven't been properly verified, on claims made by a woman with no expertise in historical research or mining law." "The FBI seems to think she's credible," another voice called out. This one was Harold Brennan, standing in the front row at 93 years old, his voice carrying the weight of 70 years of being dismissed and ignored. I've been trying to tell the truth about what happened here for half a century. Maya Rodriguez proved I was right. Your family's fortune is built on theft, Richard. And everyone in this room knows it now." The auditorium erupted in applause. Pierce tried to speak over it, but his words were drowned out. Finally, he stepped away from the podium, and the town council president, a woman named Diana Foster, took his place. "I think it's clear we need to address this situation honestly," she said. "A special commission will be formed to investigate the historical record and determine the truth of what happened in 1879. Members will include local historians, descendants of the original miners, and representatives from the State Historical Society. Whatever we find, it will be made public." More applause. Maya sat in the back of the auditorium with Lily beside her, watching history unfold. Her daughter squeezed her hand. "You did this, Mama," Lily whispered. "You changed everything." Maya squeezed back, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The legal battles continued through the winter. David Westbrook filed a formal claim on behalf of Maya and the 38 identified descendants of the original miners. The claim argued that the Consolidation Act had been fraudulent, that the mineral rights had never been legally transferred, and that the gold still in the tunnels belonged to the heirs of those who'd first discovered it. The Pierce family and their allies fought it with everything they had. They brought in historians who argued the Consolidation Act was legitimate for its time, that modern standards couldn't be applied to 19th century legal processes. They hired geologists who disputed the survey data, claiming the gold deposits were much smaller than estimated or possibly didn't exist at all. They filed motion after motion, trying to delay, to obfuscate, to wear down their opponents through sheer legal attrition. But they were fighting against something bigger than one woman or even one group of descendants. They were fighting against a story that had captured the nation's attention, a narrative of injustice finally being brought to light. Media coverage was relentless. Documentary crews were making films. Authors were writing books. The Ashwood Ridge gold theft had become a symbol of everything wrong with systems that allowed the powerful to exploit the vulnerable without consequence. And the evidence kept mounting. FBI investigators found documents in territorial archives that had been deliberately misfiled, hidden in boxes labeled with unrelated subjects. They discovered correspondence between Carlton Pierce and other consortium members explicitly discussing how to manipulate the Consolidation Act for their benefit. They located bank records showing massive deposits into Pierce family accounts in 1880 and 81, amounts that couldn't be explained by any legitimate business dealings. The geological surveys confirmed what Maya had found. The tunnel system extended beneath the entire valley, a network of passages and chambers that had been excavated with remarkable skill. And throughout the system were gold deposits of staggering value. The final estimate came in at $275.3 million at current market prices. The legal case went before Judge Sarah Mendez of the Colorado District Court in April, 7 months after Maya had first descended those stone steps in the rain. The courtroom was packed with descendants, supporters, reporters, and the well-dressed lawyers representing the families who had so much to lose. Maya sat in the front row, wearing the only professional outfit she owned, a black suit she'd bought at Goodwill for $30. Lily sat beside her, having been excused from school for the day. On Maya's other side was Harold Brennan, who'd told her this was the moment he'd been waiting for his entire adult life. Judge Mendez was in her 50s, with grey hair and the kind of penetrating gaze that made everyone in the courtroom sit up straighter. She spent 3 days hearing arguments from both sides, reviewing documents, questioning witnesses. Maya testified for 6 hours, walking the judge through everything she'd discovered, every document she'd found, every step of her journey from cleaning houses to standing in a federal courtroom. On the 3rd day, after closing arguments had been made and the last witness dismissed, Judge Mendez took a brief recess before delivering her decision. Maya sat frozen in her seat, unable to move or speak, while David Westbrook reviewed his notes one final time. When Judge Mendez returned, the courtroom fell silent. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented," she began, "and I've studied the historical record extensively. What emerges is a clear pattern of fraud and corruption. The Consolidation Act of 1879 was pushed through the territorial legislature without proper procedure, without adequate compensation to claim holders, and with the explicit intent of transferring wealth to a small group of politically connected individuals. Maya's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear. The mineral rights claimed by the original miners were never legally transferred. The gold extracted after 1879 was taken without just compensation, and the wealth accumulated by the consortium families was, in essence, stolen property. Someone gasped. Maya wasn't sure if it was her or someone else. Therefore, I rule that the original mining claims are still valid, and the mineral rights to all gold deposits within the Ashwood Valley Tunnel system belong to the heirs of those claim holders. Miss Rodriguez, as the property owner where the primary access point is located, and as a representative of the heir group, I'm designating you as the trustee of these mineral rights pending establishment of a proper distribution mechanism. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. The lawyers representing the Pierce family stood in shock. David Westbrook grabbed Maya's hand and squeezed it so hard it hurt. Judge Mendez banged her gavel. Furthermore, I'm ordering a complete investigation into how these families acquired their initial wealth and whether any of their current assets can be traced directly to the stolen gold. This court will not allow the proceeds of theft to be protected simply because enough time has passed. Maya couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what was happening. Beside her, Harold Brennan was crying openly, his weathered face wet with tears. "I knew," he kept saying. "I always knew." Lily pulled on Maya's sleeve. "Mama, did we win?" Maya looked down at her daughter, this beautiful child who'd endured so much mockery and pain, and finally found her voice. "Yeah, baby, we won." The aftermath of the court decision was chaos. The national media descended on Ashwood Ridge in force. Maya's face was on the cover of Time magazine with the headline, "The Woman Who Exposed a Century of Lies." The story was picked up internationally, becoming a symbol of how ordinary people could challenge corrupt systems and win. But for Maya, the most important changes were closer to home. The Pierce family, facing potential criminal charges and massive civil liability, reached a settlement. They agreed to establish a $50 million fund to compensate descendants of the original miners and to cover all legal costs associated with the case. They also agreed to publicly acknowledge their family's role in the theft and to support a historical preservation effort to document the true history of Ashwood Ridge. Vernon Keats quietly sold his rental properties and left town. Patricia Drummond issued a public apology, though it was clearly written by lawyers and felt hollow. Sheriff Tom Brennan was voted out in a special election, replaced by a woman who'd grown up cleaning houses just like Maya. The tunnel system beneath the valley became a protected historical site. The gold remained in place while experts debated the best way to extract it responsibly and distribute the proceeds fairly. Maya, as trustee, worked with a team of lawyers, historians, and mining engineers to develop a plan that would benefit not just the descendants, but the entire community. She established the Ashwood Valley Heritage Trust, funded by a portion of the gold's future value. The trust's mission was threefold: preserve the historical truth of what happened in 1879, provide educational opportunities for young people in the valley, and support those struggling with poverty and economic insecurity. The Hobbit shack, that earth-covered cottage that had been mocked and scorned, became the trust's headquarters and a museum. Maya worked with architects to preserve the structure while making it accessible, adding exhibits about the mining history, Thomas Ashwood's journal, and the long fight for justice. The tunnel entrance remained visible behind glass, a reminder of what had been hidden and what had been revealed. On the day the museum opened, over 2,000 people attended. The governor gave a speech. Harold Brennan cut the ribbon, his hands steady for the first time in years. And Maya stood beside him, no longer invisible, no longer poor, no longer powerless. But the money didn't change who she was at her core. She and Lily stayed in the rental house in Clayton Ridge, though Maya bought it outright from Grace Chen, who cried when Maya insisted on paying 20% over market value. Maya hired a staff for the trust, prioritizing people who'd struggled the way she had, single mothers and workers who'd been overlooked and dismissed. She created a scholarship fund for students from low-income families. She established a small business loan program for entrepreneurs who couldn't get traditional financing. She built a community center where people could learn trades and get job training. Every decision was guided by memory of what it felt like to be powerless, to watch your daughter hurt and be unable to protect her, to clean toilets for people who looked through you like you weren't even human. The legal settlement eventually grew to $75 million as more families acknowledged their role in the original theft. The trust's endowment swelled, and slowly, systematically, Maya used that money to reshape Ashwood Ridge into a place where wealth didn't determine worth, where everyone had opportunity, where children like Lily could grow up believing their circumstances didn't define their potential. Lily thrived in her new school. The bullying stopped completely once everyone understood who her mother was, though Maya hated that it took power and money for people to treat her daughter with basic decency. But Lily herself changed in deeper ways. She became confident, outspoken, unafraid to challenge injustice when she saw it. She started a club at school focused on local history, leading tours of the museum, telling visitors about Thomas Ashwood and the miners who'd been robbed. On the first anniversary of finding the tunnel, Maya stood in the museum at sunset, watching the last visitors of the day examine exhibits. Miss Chen was there with a group of her students, explaining the significance of the Consolidation Act. Harold Brennan sat in his usual chair by the window, greeting people who wanted to hear his stories. Grace Chen was giving a tour to a group of journalists from Japan, explaining how one woman's courage had exposed a century of lies. David Westbrook found Maya standing alone by the glass-enclosed tunnel entrance, her reflection ghostly in the fading light. "You know what's remarkable?" he said. "It's not the gold or the money or even the legal victory. It's that you took something that was meant to shame you, that house everyone mocked, and turned it into a symbol of courage. People come here from all over the world now, not to see gold, but to see the place where someone refused to stay silent." Maya smiled. "I just did what needed to be done." "No," David corrected gently. "You did what no one else had the courage to do for 145 years. You looked into darkness and refused to turn away." That night, after the museum closed and everyone had gone home, Maya walked outside to where the original cottage still stood, preserved exactly as it had been. The grass-covered roof, the round door, the earth pressing against the walls, the Hobbit shack. She thought about the first time she'd seen this place 3 years ago, desperate and broke and terrified. She'd signed a lease on something everyone called ugly because it was all she could afford. She'd endured the mockery, the judgment, the cruelty of people who thought where you lived determined your value. But this ugly little house had held a secret that changed everything. And the woman everyone dismissed as just a cleaning lady had been brave enough to uncover it. Lily came out to join her, wrapping her arms around Maya's waist. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "Living here?" Maya pulled her daughter close. "I miss the simplicity of not knowing what was underneath. But I wouldn't change anything. Every hard moment led us here." "Kids at school still talk about you," Lily said. "They say you're like a superhero." Maya laughed. "I'm not a superhero, baby. I'm just a mom who got tired of accepting things the way they were." "Isn't that what heroes do?" Lily asked. "Fight when everyone else gives up?" Maya didn't have an answer. She just held her daughter and watched the stars emerge over the valley that had kept its secrets for so long. The second year brought more changes. The gold extraction began, done carefully by a company Maya and the trust board vetted extensively. They used modern techniques that minimized environmental impact, and every ounce extracted was documented and accounted for. The profits went into the trust, growing its endowment, expanding its programs. Ashwood Ridge became known as a model for restorative justice. Other communities with similar histories of land theft and exploitation reached out, asking for guidance. Maya found herself traveling, speaking, teaching others how to uncover truth and fight for justice. She spoke at universities, conferences, even testified before Congress about the need to address historical injustices. But she always came home to the valley, to the museum, to the community she'd helped transform. And every time she returned, she was reminded of how far they'd come. The third anniversary celebration was massive. The governor declared it Ashwood Valley Heritage Day. Descendants of the original miners came from across the country, many of them receiving their first distributions from the settlement fund. Some used the money to pay off debt, others to start businesses, others to fund their children's education. Each one had a story about what this justice meant to their family. Maya stood at the podium in front of the museum, looking out at thousands of faces. Some she knew, many she didn't. All of them were there because one rainy night, she'd climbed down stone steps into darkness and refused to be afraid. 3 years ago, she began, her voice strong and clear, I was invisible. I was a single mother cleaning houses, struggling to survive, watching my daughter suffer because we were different, because we were poor, because we lived in a house people mocked. She paused, letting the words sink in. But something I've learned through all of this is that being overlooked can be a kind of superpower. Because when people don't see you, when they assume you're not smart enough or strong enough or important enough to matter, they get careless. They leave evidence where you can find it. They underestimate what you'll do when pushed too far. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The families who built their wealth on stolen gold, they thought they could keep their secrets forever. They thought their money and power made them untouchable. They were wrong. Because truth doesn't care about your bank account. Justice doesn't care about your last name. And courage doesn't require anything except the willingness to stand up when everyone else sits down. The applause started softly but built to a roar. This museum, this trust, this whole story, it's not really about me. It's about everyone who's ever been told they don't matter, that their struggles are their own fault, that they should accept their place and stay quiet. It's about refusing that narrative. It's about looking at systems that benefit the few at the expense of the many and saying, no, this isn't right, and I'm going to fight to change it. Maya looked down at Lily, sitting in the front row between Harold Brennan and Miss Chen. My daughter asked me once why we had to live in the Hobbit shack, why we couldn't have a normal house like everyone else. I didn't have a good answer then, but I do now. We lived there because that's where we needed to be. That's where history was waiting to be discovered. That's where courage was tested and proven. She smiled. And you know what? I'm glad everyone called it the Hobbit shack, because hobbits are small and overlooked, but in the stories, they're the ones who save the world. Not because they're powerful, but because they have good hearts and they don't give up, even when the journey seems impossible. The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. So to everyone out there who feels invisible, who feels powerless, who thinks their voice doesn't matter, I want you to know something. You're wrong. Your voice matters more than you can imagine. Your courage can change systems that have been broken for generations. Your refusal to accept injustice can inspire thousands of others to stand up too. She gripped the podium, her knuckles white. Don't let anyone make you small. Don't let anyone tell you to stay in your place. And when you find a door to truth, even if it's hidden in darkness, even if powerful people want it to stay closed, kick that door open and let the light pour in. The applause was deafening. People stood, cheering, some crying. Maya stepped back from the podium, overwhelmed by the response. David Westbrook hugged her. Harold Brennan shook her hand with tears streaming down his face. Lily ran up and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. That was amazing, Mama, she whispered. You inspire me every single day, Maya whispered back. Everything I do is for you. As the sun set on that third anniversary, Maya stood once more by the Hobbit shack, now preserved as a historical landmark. A plaque beside the door read, In this place, Maya Rodriguez discovered evidence that would expose a century of injustice. Her courage reminds us that truth, once uncovered, cannot be buried again. She traced her fingers over the words, thinking about everything that had happened in 3 short years. From desperate and invisible to a voice that changed history. From cleaning toilets to managing a $75 million trust. From the Hobbit girl's mother to someone whose name would be remembered long after she was gone. But the part she was proudest of had nothing to do with money or recognition. It was simpler than that. She was proud that Lily could go to school without fear. Proud that other single mothers in the valley had opportunities they'd never had before. Proud that the truth about what happened in 1879 was now taught in every school, preserved in every history book, acknowledged by everyone who'd once denied it. She'd started with nothing but a flashlight, a sense of curiosity, and a refusal to accept that things had to stay the way they'd always been. That had been enough. It had been more than enough. Maya locked the museum door for the night and walked to her car. Tomorrow she had meetings about expanding the scholarship fund and plans to review for the new community center. But tonight, she was going home to her daughter, to the house they owned free and clear, to a life they'd built from courage and truth. The Hobbit shack stood silent in the darkness behind her, no longer a symbol of shame, but a monument to the power of one person who refused to stay silent. And in the valley beneath, the tunnels waited, their gold slowly being extracted and transformed into opportunity, education, and justice for people who'd been denied it for far too long. Because sometimes the smallest among us carry the greatest power. Sometimes the most overlooked hold the keys to truth. And sometimes a woman everyone dismissed as just a cleaning lady becomes exactly the hero a broken system needed. Anyone can change the world if they're brave enough to look into darkness and refuse to turn away. As the stars emerged over Ashwood Ridge that night, Maya Rodriguez drove home to her daughter, no longer the invisible woman in the Hobbit shack, but a mother who'd taught an entire town that courage doesn't require power, wealth, or privilege. It only requires the willingness to stand for truth when everyone else looks away. She had started with nothing but a flashlight and a crumbling cottage, and she'd uncovered not just gold worth hundreds of millions, but something far more valuable. Proof that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that one person's refusal to accept injustice can echo through generations. The cleaning lady who scrubbed other people's floors had built something that would outlast every mansion in the valley, a legacy of courage, truth, and the unwavering belief that every voice matters, especially the ones the world tries hardest to silence. Because for Maya, and for everyone who'd ever been told they were too small, too poor, or too powerless to make a difference, the Hobbit shack became proof that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most unexpected places. And their stories remind us that the measure of a life isn't found in mansions or bank accounts, but in the courage to uncover truth and the strength to fight for justice, no matter the cost. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click now to keep discovering, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the truth deserves a voice and courage can change everything.